Thank you, Corey. You made some of the introductions I was going to make, but let me just add my welcome to Anne. It's great of you to travel to Halifax today to be here for this. I wanted to also welcome we've got a big team from the Bank of Canada here, but rather than introduce every single one of them, I just will introduce you to Sarah Miller, who's our regional director, runs our Atlantic office here in Halifax. So delighted to have the team with me today. It's been a while since I've been in Halifax, and about 8 years, and I think I was telling someone the last event I was at in Halifax was at this hotel, and I remember the view, and wow, your city has changed a lot in 8 years. The waterfront particularly is impressive. There's a lot of development, so. And thanks all of you for being here today. I know we're not the hottest ticket in town this week. We arrived Sunday, to a lobby full of people, had us feeling very underdressed. There was a lot of gowns and sequins and glitter, so I'm sure everybody enjoyed the Junos here this week. Halifax is a city that reminds us that Canada is an economy built on trade and immigration. And Halifax is not just a key port, it's also been the landing spot for countless new Canadians. So I'm particularly happy to be speaking to a group like Halifax Partnership, which is dedicated to helping Canadian businesses grow and thrive. We just passed the 4th anniversary of the beginning of the pandemic, if you can believe that. It was 4 difficult years. Beyond its human toll, the pandemic upended economies around the world and sparked the biggest global inflationary episode in decades. That, of course, led central banks, including the Bank of Canada, to raise interest rates sharply so we could get inflation under control. For the past 2 years or so, the bank's governing council has been laser-focused on restoring price stability. And it's pretty much all we've talked about in our public speeches. And we've heard directly from Canadians who have struggled with inflation and with the impacts of its cure, higher interest rates. The good news is that monetary policy is working, and inflation has come a long way down. We're not all the way back to target yet. We've still got some work to do to finish the job. But we've made a lot of progress. And so now is a good time to reflect on how the economy has changed in Canada and around the world, and to think about what those changes mean for our future. When we look ahead, we see a future where inflation is likely to be a bigger threat than it has been in the last few decades. We know that many of the forces that have helped create a benign environment for inflation in the past could fade or even reverse. We know that changing demographics and the economic impacts of climate change will tend to put upward pressure on prices, and persistent global trade tensions are also raising the risk of future inflation. So at the Bank of Canada, we're turning our thoughts and our speeches to this future. And today I want to talk about a topic that's critical to our ability to navigate a future that may be more prone to inflation, and that's productivity. Productivity is a way to inoculate our economy against future inflation. An economy with low productivity can only grow so fast before inflation starts to set in. But an economy with strong productivity can have faster growth, more jobs, and higher wages with less risk of inflation. That's why I want to talk about Canada's long-standing poor record on productivity and convince you just how big of a problem it is. You know those signs that say, in an emergency, break the glass? Well, it's time to break the glass. Canada's labor productivity eked out a small gain at the end of last year, according to Stats Can. But that gain came after 6 straight quarters where productivity fell. Of course, the pandemic was a major disruptor for the economy. And during the pandemic, the resourcefulness and the ingenuity of Canadian businesses was put to full use. Companies adjusted their business models and their ways of working. And given how nimble our companies were, we thought productivity would improve coming out of the pandemic as firms found their footing and employees got trained back up. We did see that happen in the US, but it hasn't happened here in Canada. In fact, the level of productivity in Canada's business sector is more or less unchanged from where it was 7 years ago. Lots of people have been sounding the alarm, but it can be hard to feel a sense of urgency about an abstract concept like productivity. Most people, when they hear we need to improve productivity, think they're being told you have to work harder, work longer hours, take less time off. But that's not the case. That's not the message. Labor productivity measures how much an economy produces per hour of work. Increasing productivity means finding ways for people to create more value during the time they're at work. This is something to aim for, not something to fear. When a company increases productivity, it means more revenue, which allows it to pay higher wages to its workers without having to raise prices. Ultimately, higher productivity helps the economy generate more wealth for everyone. The bottom line is that benefits from raising productivity are there, no matter what your role is, for workers, for businesses, and for central bankers too. And that's a point I'll come back to a bit later. First, I want to spend some time spelling out the factors that determine productivity. I'll review Canada's record for clues about how we could improve, and I'll talk about what we can all do to raise Canada's productivity and make our economy more resilient. Economists will tell you there's 3 factors that determine how productive a workforce is. There's capital intensity, there's labor composition, and then there's multi-factor productivity. These are the kinds of words that can make non-economists tune out, but they're important, and once you get the hang of them, they're not that complicated. So I want to take just a quick look at each one. Capital intensity is about equipping workers with better tools. If you run a snow clearing business and your workers are able to clear more driveways if they have solid shovels that don't break easily. Of course, if you give them a snowblower, they'll be able to clear even more driveways and invest in pickup trucks with plows, and they can do even more. This is sort of the easiest way to think about capital intensity in physical terms like machinery and equipment. But some of the biggest advances in productivity have come through investments in computing power, the ability to move and use information more efficiently. The smartphone we all have in front of us has more computing power than the spaceship that took the first humans to the moon. It's advances like this that continue to put more capability in the hands of employees, giving them the ability to be more productive across a wide range of industries. The second factor, labor composition, measures the skill level of people in the labor force and how much training they receive. The more skills people have, of course, the more value they can generate on the job. And then finally, there's multi-factor productivity, kind of a fancy term, but it basically just means how efficiently are the other 2 factors, capital and labor, being used. It usually refers to intangible things like how much competition there is in the economy, economies of scale, and management practices. It can also refer to how companies are using or taking advantage of technologies like machine learning and artificial intelligence. So those are the ingredients of productivity. Now, when people measure productivity, they usually look at either its level, so how much value an economy is producing for every hour worked, or they look at its growth rate. And Canada has been struggling on both of those measures for a while now. Back in 1984, productivity in Canada's economy was 88% of that in the US. Now that doesn't sound good, but the real problem is that by 2022, Canadian productivity had fallen to just 71%, so we're going the wrong direction. Over the same time, we also fell behind our other G7 peers relative to performance against the US. So improving productivity in Canada needs to be a priority for everyone. And there's 2 basic strategies to do it. One is to have the economy focus more resources on the industries that add greater value. The other strategy is to keep doing what we're doing, keep doing the jobs we're doing, but to do them more efficiently. Ideally, we'd use a combination of both of these strategies to lead to an economy with strong productivity growth and a larger concentration in high-value industries. Unfortunately, our recent record isn't good on either front. Now, that can seem strange. I mean, after all, Canada's known for some high-value industries like energy and aerospace. But while the level of productivity in those sectors is high, the growth rate isn't necessarily that strong. At the same time, some industries in Canada have shown pretty good productivity growth over the past couple of decades, but these include sectors like retail and wholesale trade, which tend not to generate the same amount of output per worker as sectors like energy or aerospace. Now, I want to be clear. Improving productivity doesn't mean shutting down entire sections of our economy and telling workers they need to go find a new skill set. It does mean we need to pay attention to where the future high-value industries are coming from. We need to ensure that the right incentives are in place to allow companies in these sectors to grow and thrive. And they need the right supports, things like access to financing and markets. I expect that's something that resonates with the folks here in the room this morning. History shows that advances in productivity often come from the startups and the new companies led by entrepreneurs with groundbreaking ideas. And it's important for organizations like Halifax Partnership and other incubators who encourage the companies that can lead us to the next breakthrough in productivity. And you can see examples of this. I've seen it across the Atlantic region, particularly in clean tech, ocean tech, and the agri-tech sector. Now, I want to turn to what we can do to improve Canada's productivity. There's been many studies that have looked at this over the years, and there's still really no consensus about the root cause of Canada's poor performance or where policymakers need to put their energies first. But we can't really wait for a complete consensus or for certainty. There's no shortage of ideas. In fact, if I took the time to drill down on every potential priority, this would turn into a lunch speech pretty soon, and I expect I'd lose most of you. So I'm just going to focus on three things. The first is labor composition, or the skills workers bring to the job. For existing workers, improvement here means having access to training and reskilling programs as the nature of work changes. For new entrants to the workforce, we're counting on colleges, universities, and apprenticeship programs to make sure they're preparing our students for both current jobs and for the jobs of the future. It's also important to acknowledge that Canada's workforce is expanding at a record-setting pace, with immigration driving this increase. In January alone, the working-age population in Canada grew by over 125,000 people. That's the single fastest month of workforce growth on record. Canada's productivity, and in fact our standard of living, will depend importantly on how we leverage and develop the skills of these new workers. Too often, new Canadians are working in jobs that don't take advantage of the skills they already possess, and too often these people wind up stuck in low-wage, low-productivity jobs. Doing better at matching jobs and workers is crucial to the future of Canada's economy. The second area I want to talk about is multi-factor productivity. We know that small and mid-sized companies tend to lack the economies of scale that big companies have that help make them more productive. And Canada has proportionally more smaller firms than most other economies do. So removing disincentives for our small companies to grow into bigger companies is always a good idea. But if I had to pick the biggest concern in this area, I'd say it's competition. Simply put, businesses become more productive when they're exposed to more competition. Competition drives companies to innovate and find ways to be more efficient. And in doing so, competition can make an entire economy more productive. In Canada, there are sectors in our economy where companies face limited levels of competition, whether from new entrants or from firms from outside the country or even firms from other provinces. Of course, every country has certain sectors that it champions, and there can be valid reasons to protect local business. But too much protection can lead to problems. It might help to explain Canada's weak record on business investment. And that brings me to the third topic I want to talk about, and that's improving investment. When you compare Canada's recent productivity record with that of other countries, what really sticks out is how much we lag on investment in machinery and equipment, and importantly, on intellectual property. The global economy continues to change rapidly, and in many sectors, it's no longer machinery and equipment that are the key. It's investment in intellectual property. Increasingly, companies need to own or have access to the patents that allow them to compete by adopting productivity-boosting processes. Weak investment has been a problem in Canada for a long time. You can go back 50 years and find a persistent gap between the level of capital spending per worker in Canadian firms and that in their US counterparts. But concerningly, the situation has become worse over the last decade. While US spending continues to increase, Canadian investment levels are lower than they were 10 years ago. Economists and policymakers across the country have worked hard to understand the root cause of why Canadian businesses seem reluctant to invest. At the bank, we're constantly talking to companies, asking them about their challenges and opportunities. Our Business Outlook survey consistently shows that companies say they plan to increase spending on machinery and equipment, but we just haven't seen it show up in the data. Adding to the puzzle is the fact that Canada has many of the advantages that should really lead to higher investment and productivity. We have a well-educated labor force. We have a strong research culture at our universities that drives advances in technology. And we have trade agreements that give us better access to global markets than any country in the world. So, to understand the lack of investment, maybe we need to examine the incentives that companies see. If firms have high profits and high margins and limited competition, it's possible they don't feel the pressure to invest. StatsCan published a report just last month that drew a link between decreasing competition in Canada and declining levels of investment. Another challenge for companies may be the lack of policy uncertainty. In some cases, incentives or regulatory approaches change year to year, and we've heard from companies that are naturally wary of a regulatory approval process that can be both lengthy and unpredictable. And of course, the past few years have been a difficult time to make investment decisions. The pandemic caused a tremendous level of instability and uncertainty. A backdrop of global trade tension is certainly not helping matters. And more recently, of course, we hear from firms that the current interest rate environment is making financing more difficult. But investment levels were also weak in the years before the pandemic, when interest rates were much, much lower than they are now. More generally, in times of upheaval, it's natural for companies, especially established ones, to want to be cautious and build reserves. We get that. We see the risks out there. Yet these same forces and the same risks are also present in other countries. And companies in those countries, our global competitors, continue to invest and widen the gap with Canada, making it increasingly urgent that we turn the situation around. The Bank of Canada has a role here. It's our job to deliver the economic stability that encourages businesses to invest. You can be sure we'll continue to do all we can to help get inflation back to target, to keep it low, stable, and predictable, supporting an investment climate for businesses to take advantage of. This is our contribution to helping bring about an economy that's not only more productive, but also more resilient. So I've used some grim statistics about productivity to support my arguments today. But the urgency comes not only from the future that awaits us if we don't act, but it also comes from the payoff if we do. So I'm going to conclude, or try to conclude, on a little more uplifting note. Higher productivity should be everyone's goal because it's how we build a better economy for everyone. When a business gives its workers better tools and training, those workers can produce more. That in turn means more revenue for the business, and that revenue allows it to absorb rising costs and pay higher wages without having to raise prices. For our part, central banks tend to look at the economy as a whole. And when the entire economy becomes more productive, that means the country can have more growth before we see upward pressure on inflation. We've all been through a pretty wrenching period in the global economy. We've been reminded just how corrosive inflation is and how difficult the remedy can be. Increasing productivity is a way to protect our economy from future bouts of inflation without having to rely so much on the cure of higher interest rates. Now, for the benefit of people watching in our other official language, I am going to summarize just a few key points in French. Quand l'économie est plus productive, on peut avoir une croissance plus forte sans que l'inflation monte. Ça veut dire plus d'emplois et des salaires plus élevés. L'économie mondiale sort d'une période difficile. Ça nous a rappelé que l'inflation fait mal et les hausses de taux d'intérêt aussi. Améliorer la productivité protège l'économie contre les poussées d'inflation sans qu'on dépende autant des hausses de taux. At the Bank of Canada, we'll keep working to provide the stability that's conducive to risk-taking and investment. With governments providing the right policy background and with the business community ready to invest, together we'll be able to help grow the Canadian economy, help Canadians prosper in the years ahead, no matter what surprises may come. Thank you. Okay. Oh, thank you.
Thank you very much.
Ian, welcome.
Good morning, everyone. I also am not Wendy Luther. I'm Ian Munro, Chief Economist with the Halifax Partnership, and it's my honor to have a few minutes to ask Carolyn some questions and moderate questions you may have from the floor. Maybe I'll just get started with one or two, but I think you'll see a couple of my colleagues roaming the room with microphones. There we are, Krista and Nathan. So if you have a question, just please raise your hand. They'll come over to you with the microphone. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Just before the event here, I had people coming up to me and saying, oh, you have an economist from the Bank of Canada talking about productivity. You must be like totally geeking out today. And so that was really excellent. Thank you. I felt like getting my cell phone out and kind of doing this sort of thing.
But the Taylor Swift moment.
Exactly,
right?
exactly. But no, that was very good. So maybe I'll just start with a question or two, and then we'll see if we have some coming from the floor here. I'll drill into your comments a little bit. So productivity performance can be influenced by a lot of factors: capital investment, research and innovation, worker skills and training, infrastructure, taxation, regulatory and competition environment. Do you feel any of these maybe warrant extra attention compared to the others? Do any kind of stand out to you as the top priorities?
We wouldn't have had this problem for as long as we have if there was sort of a silver bullet, one single thing we could be doing better, right? I think if there's one thing that's sort of top of mind for a lot of people right now, it's that matching, that skills matching issue. We've had a big surge in immigration, like a lot of things. Over the course of the pandemic, we were out of balance. We had a really big drop, completely shut down the borders. There was no immigration, so we've had this big surge come back. I think it's really important that our immigration strategy and our productivity strategy are matched up, that we're bringing in people that have the skills to fill the jobs we need, things like housing. Those are the types of things that I think are really top of mind right now, that matching thing, making sure that we leverage that population growth so that we can boost the economy.
Okay, yeah. Thank you. Yeah, I'll jump in with another one then. In terms of productivity gains, the U.S. has come out of the pandemic with great leaps in productivity, while others, including Canada, have not. What are they doing right that we're not?
Yeah, it's always kind of hard to live next to the U.S., right? You get compared to them on all kinds of things. Mm-hmm. Sorry, I feel like I have my back to half the room. But, I have one of my colleagues I have with me who comes out of our global economy part of the bank, and she made the point yesterday that maybe one way to look at this right now is the U.S. it could be the outlier. We're seeing outstanding productivity growth in the U.S. Every country's looking enviously at the U.S. 3% growth. There's many reasons. We know the U.S. is known for a very entrepreneurial culture. The level of investment in the U.S. is definitely higher. The level of adoption of new technologies is definitely higher. But I think even when we talk to our colleagues at the Fed, at the central bank in the U.S., even they're a little perplexed by just how strong the productivity growth in the U.S. has been. So it's possible maybe at least the current level of growth they're seeing is really kind of more the outlier, and there'll be some convergence. Hopefully we'll pick up a bit. Right. But I think if we don't necessarily need to aspire to 3% productivity growth, I think that's a bit optimistic. That's what we're seeing in the U.S. right now. If we could get up around 1%, we'd be really happy with that.
Right, okay. So you've had a couple of days to meet with people here in Halifax, meet with business leaders and so on. What are you hearing from them on these issues? Are you hearing anything different than you would hear in Ottawa or Toronto?
Yeah, well, I mean, if I had to characterize what we've heard so far, we're meeting with some more businesses this afternoon, but we spent yesterday talking to a lot of different groups. And if I had to characterize it in one word, I'd say optimistic. I think the sense in Halifax is things have really turned the corner. They're going in the right direction. One of the things I was really impressed with, I was talking to some people just before we got going this morning, is the housing response. I mean, housing is a big problem across the country. But what I've heard here that's really interesting is a real focus on purpose-built rental. And we're seeing better housing starts in this market than we are across Canada. Now, we're still a long way from being able to catch up. We've still got a real gap between demand and supply in housing, but it sounds like there's more use of modular housing, there's a focus on purpose-built rental, and we are seeing a higher housing start level here. So that's encouraging.
Great.
We also heard about some pretty exciting energy projects, some green energy projects that sound good. Shipbuilding is coming back here. So, and immigration, I think, the last time I remember being here, the concern was completely the other way around. The population was declining, housing prices were falling, there was a lot of concerns. So yeah, I mean, the sense I have here is there's a lot of optimism. Some of the same pressures and problems we hear in other parts of Canada, but definitely a sense of optimism.
Great. Do we have any questions from the floor yet? Mr. Corey Bell.
My question would be around AI.
Yeah.
I read an article somewhere that shows that Canadians are behind the curve as far as implementing. And I need a mic. Yeah. Okay.
Just help the back of the room, sure.
I'll start.
There we go.
Hello.
Yep.
Okay. Yeah. So my question, I'll start over, is around AI, and I read an article earlier in the week about how we as Canadians do not adopt it as quickly as some other countries out there. Is there a link that you're looking at around utilization of AI and productivity? Because my sense would be, as others are adopting AI, productivity goes up, and if we're slow to that, you're going to see the gap actually go the wrong way.
Yeah, I mean, that's a risk. And it'd be a shame, right? Because Canada is one of the leaders in developing AI. So it would be a real shame if we aren't also a leader in using it to improve our productivity. So definitely. I mean, I think what I would say, Corey, is the jury's still out on exactly what AI will do to productivity, or at least how fast. I mean, we often kind of overestimate the short-term impact and underestimate the long-term impact when it comes to sort of new technologies like this. So I've heard arguments on both sides. I've heard, AI is going to displace all kinds of workers, and we're going to have an employment problem. I've also heard, no, it's going to make the workers we have way more productive. Depends on the industries, the sectors. So I think there's a fair bit of debate right now. It'll have an impact. Hopefully, Canada will use some of the amazing technology we've developed in this area. Yeah.
Oh, we have a question over here.
Hi, Carolyn. It's Becky from the Halifax Chamber. I love your talk. It was great. I took lots of notes. My question is, so you said that Canadian business investment is actually going down over the last 10 years. Can you let us know why you think that is, and what, if you can, and maybe what needs to happen to change that, to get people a little bit more risky and more investing?
Yeah, this is the puzzle, Becky. I mean, this is, like I said in the speech, central bankers, policymakers, legislators, we've all tried to sort of solve that puzzle. What is it that holds Canadian businesses back? There's some sense that some of this might just be kind of almost cultural. We're not sort of as risk-taking as, particularly if you compare us to the U.S. Canadian businesses tend to be sort of more careful followers than leaders. So things like adopting technology, things like AI, we tend to kind of, even if we build the technology, we talk to high-tech firms that say, well, we build the technology, our first customers are always in the U.S., and then when Canadian companies see U.S. firms using our technology successfully, then usually we can invest, or we can convince our Canadian companies to invest. So it's maybe sort of just a deeply ingrained, culture approach to doing business. It is a puzzle, though. So no, I don't have, I wish I had the answer. Yeah.
Paula Flesh.
Hi, Paula Flesh from the province of Nova Scotia. So the most disturbing thing I heard today was the differential between where the American economy, the U.S. economy is going in productivity and ours. And you probably don't have the answer, but it would be great if we could understand. You mentioned the factors of productivity. Which of the factors is our problem? Are all of them our problem? I suspect, given the last two questions, that investment and adoption of technology may be most of our problem, but it may be labor is the problem or multi-factor, I don't know.
Yeah, I mean, I think you picked the two that if I had to pick the top two, those are probably the two I'd pick. Like I said, we do know that there's a far greater tendency to adopt technology quicker in the U.S., and the gap in investment is quite large. But I mean, I don't think there's any one thing that explains the gap. No, there's more than one thing we need to work on to fix it, for sure.
Oh, I'm sorry, right back here. I can't see in the lights.
Yeah.
Hi, thank you so much. Zach Churchill, leader of the opposition here in Nova Scotia.
Hi.
Thank you so much for taking time to be with us today. I also really enjoyed your commentary. One of the other exciting things happening, particularly in the city, is the development of a really good startup ecosystem. A lot of new young entrepreneurs are coming up and choosing to stay here and be creative.
Yeah.
You mentioned one of the issues we have is incentivizing investment. Obviously, that's key to getting these businesses going, giving them a chance. Does the public sector have a role to play in incentivizing that investment? Do we have to rethink the incentives that we have in place right now that are currently built around tax incentives and seem to really limit our pool of investment here in Nova Scotia to people that live here? And are there jurisdictions that are leading the way in terms of being destinations for capital investment from around the world and other parts of the country? Thank you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, tax incentives are sort of well outside our area of expertise. But I think, does the public sector have a role to play? Yes. Does the private sector have a role to play? Absolutely. I mean, I think incubators that help small, young companies figure out how to navigate those incentives and pair them up with access to capital, help them understand things like SHRED and all these programs where they can access some of the public sector support. I think those are really important because I think, often these young entrepreneurs, they've got a really great idea about how to navigate all of the different incentives, the things that are available to help them grow their business. That's the difficult part. So yeah, incubators, Halifax Partnership. We talked to Unluweg, an Aboriginal incubator yesterday. So it's really good to see those programs available.
JP DeVoe, Acadian Sea Plants. Going back to the productivity issue, the difference between the United States and Canada. Canada, here we have large social programs here, backdrops that people can depend on. That doesn't exist as much in the United States. And we've had that for a long, long time. And I'm wondering if perhaps it's created a mentality in Canada where people are saying, I don't have to go out there. I don't have to hustle as much. The government's going to take care of me. And so is this something that's a fundamental difference between Canada and the United States that over a long term has created that type of mentality where the Americans become more productive because they said, hey, we have to do this, and we've been built to do that, and we'll continue to do that, whereas here in Canada, we've got this type of issue that has come about over a long-term period?
Yeah, I mean, I don't know that I see that. I certainly don't see that here in Halifax. There's a lot of hustle, a lot of drive to build a more productive economy. I don't think most people wake up in the morning and figure out how not to be productive. I think most people want to be more productive. Most employees want to be more productive. Most businesses want a more productive environment. So, I mean, I guess that's a theory. It doesn't resonate with me.
Good morning. Hi, Councillor Pam Lovelace with Halifax. Thank you for being here, and thank you for your kind words about our amazing city. So I just have a couple of questions. I'm picking up actually what JP was saying. Certainly there is this belief that people are waiting to be caught by government with these public programs. Certainly, if this was the case, we wouldn't have this much homelessness across the country. My question is kind of linking productivity with efficiency. And with efficiency, obviously, as we see investments with productivity, investments in efficiency, we also have difficulty in accessing capital because of the risk. And so yesterday I had a conversation with a mortgage lender talking about supporting nonprofit organizations to build public housing. First thing they said was how difficult it is for them to support a nonprofit organization to get the housing built to support those people who need access to affordable housing. So where is that link between supporting the lenders, the mortgage companies, the banks, and so on, to be able to not be so risk averse in that whole productivity realm of supporting, especially entrepreneurs, or supporting new thinkers and creative solutions?
Okay, there was a lot in that question.
Yeah, there is.
And I know I have a colleague here from CMHC who, I won't force him to come up on the stage and help me answer your question.
He has a 5-month-old daughter. He's very tired.
Oh, okay, yeah. No. I mean, I guess housing in particular, there was, I think you were focused mostly on housing. I mean, we've got a long-standing structural gap in supply and demand in housing in Canada, and housing in more than one area, right? And so, I mean, what I said earlier, what struck me when I was talking to the mayor of Halifax on Monday morning was the focus on purpose-built rental housing. And we talk to developers a lot. We're trying to understand the gap between supply and demand, and how do we bring more supply onto the market. We hear a lot about shortage of skilled labor, so that's one issue. But what I was impressed, I was talking to a couple of people just before here, and I didn't hear a lot of, I didn't hear a lack of incentives or a lack of programs to de-risk. I think permitting is an issue that can add cost to these projects. So, but I think the good news is governments at all levels in Canada right now are pretty focused on trying to figure out the problem and trying to put the right incentives in place and get more housing to market. We know it's a huge problem. It's going to hold up our ability to bring in the people we need to build our economy. It's a bit of a spiral. Yeah, we were talking about this. We need to bring in skilled labor to build houses, but when we bring them in, we need somewhere for them to live, and we don't have the houses yet. So, yeah, it's a problem. But like I said, the good thing is what we've seen is a huge focus by all levels of government on it. So, but it's going to take a while to fix it. You don't supply a lot of housing just like that, right? It reacts slowly.
We have time for one more question from our friend Kelvin from CMHC.
Yeah,
Okay, there you are. Kelvin, maybe you can help.
yeah, this is Kelvin from CMHC. Thank you. I really enjoyed your speech. One of the comments you made with regards to productivity is the issue of uncertainty. And right now, with housing being a big issue, there's a lot of rush, I guess, to want to jump into regulations to kind of curb price increases, increase affordability, and so forth. How much does the threat of increased regulation have on uncertainty and also productivity?
Well, I think you used exactly the right word, is uncertainty, right? I mean, what we hear from most businesses, whether it's housing or energy or really anything, is, look, I can deal with the regulatory environment. I get it, it's part of doing business. What I can't deal with is not knowing what it's going to be a year from now. So I think policy certainty is definitely something people want. I mean, we know right now a big part of the uncertainty people are feeling when it comes to housing, whether you're personally looking for a house or whether you're a developer trying to bring more housing to market, is interest rates. We get asked all the time, when can we expect that change in interest rates. So we know people are kind of on the sidelines waiting. So, you know, we get that uncertainty is part of the formula, so.
Great. All right. I'd just like to say thank you again, Carolyn,
Thank
for
you.
that. I really appreciate you being here.
Thanks.
I'll just have you could stay.
Corey Bell to close us out.
Okay.
Is Mike still out? Yeah, it is. Okay. I love not coming in behind the mayor, so I got to bring the mic down about a foot and a half. Anyway, thank you. It is clear from Ms. Rogers' remarks and discussion that we had here this morning that improving productivity is one of the linchpins that will drive economic growth here in Halifax and Nova Scotia. And as we noted at the beginning, we're not interested in growth for growth's sake, but to improve the lives of people. Ms. Rogers, thank you for this robust conversation and for choosing Halifax. I'm sure we're all leaving here with food for thought and ideas on what's next for our businesses, our communities, and our country. It was such a pleasure to have you here with us and me personally meeting you today. I want to thank the Halifax Partnership staff for putting this together. They always pull it all together, especially with Wendy having to step away quickly. Everyone pivoted and did well. Thank you to the staff. They always do a great job. I want to thank our investors here in the room. We couldn't do this without you. The Halifax Marriott Harbourfront Hotel, Encore Global for hosting us this morning, ACOA for being the big supporter here today, Bank of Canada for being here, and if you're keen to hear more from our chief economist, Ian, so thanks Ian for being here, I'd invite you to mark your calendars for the morning of June 6th when the Halifax Partnership will release the 2024 Halifax Index presented by TD. It is our annual discussion on Halifax economy and how it compares to other cities across Canada. It's not to be missed, so watch for invitations to come out soon. So with that, thank you all for coming here on a Tuesday morning. I appreciate a lot of familiar faces and glad to see everyone out here for a great conversation. Again, thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.